the panel, we think it should be a sensory experience when we talk about agroecology and diets. My name is Brittany. I'm going to chair the panel and participate in it, which I think is against the rules, but we'll do that. So it's about dietary change and agroecology, or as I've been calling it in my head, agroecology tastes better. Maybe we want to adopt that as our slogan. I think that in my own research, I've found that we tend to focus on production when we talk about agroecology and the methods, and we think a lot less about who's eating the food and what foods we're eating. And that has come up a couple of times over the last couple of days, especially in the panels on nutrition, and a lot of the farmers talking about struggling to find people who want to eat the foods that they grow. So we wanted to focus on that today, and try and look at ways of shifting our diets so that the diets are actually more compatible with agroecological production. The way the South African diet looks today, it literally will not support agroecology as a viable livelihood. So I've got some amazing people up here with me who are leading the thinking around diets and agroecology. I'll do introductions before each person. We're each going to talk for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have time to discuss. And also at the end, you can feel free to look at the amazing organic and indigenous seeds that we've got here and have more snacks. So I'm not only participating, but I'm kicking off. As I said, my name is Brittany. I'm a researcher at Wits University, where I focus on food sovereignty and food justice. I'm also a chef on the side, so I'm very interested in eating. And these days, the focus of my work is on trying to set up a community food center so we can sort of put all of these ideas into practice. So just to give you a little background on how we got to have this panel, my previous work on urban agriculture showed me that there was a major misalignment between what people eat and what farmers are growing. Skip that. So I think often we think that what we eat is just sort of a given, or maybe we're making a choice to be healthy or not healthy, but in fact there are so many factors that shape what we eat that we don't think about or consciously notice. And in South Africa, of course, the long history of colonialism and apartheid, and the sort of the racism and the migrations and all of the dispossession that entailed really affected what people have access to and what people eat. Also things like agricultural and trade policies that support production of certain things or allow import of other cheaper things influence our diets. And then in our food system within the country, the high levels of concentration and industrialization, which lead to just a few companies controlling the market at each stage of the value chain, and a focus on processed foods in urban areas where people don't have time to make food anymore, gender roles and women's double shift outside and inside of the home, and then the things like the cost of healthy foods or whether they're available in the areas where we live. People's access to kitchen infrastructure, so do you have a steady supply of electricity or other energy and running water to prepare food, refrigeration to store food, and then things like nutrition knowledge and of course cultural norms. What we consider normal in South Africa, the normal diet, what anyone would consider a basic plate, may not be a healthy plate, it may not be a diverse agroecological plate, and then individual taste preferences. So there are so many things that go into what we eat before we even think about what we feel like eating, and I think Zayan will talk a bit more about that. We know people have been talking about the levels of hunger in this country, the levels of nutrient deficiencies in our diet, very low levels of dietary diversity, and as we urbanize and industrialize, increasing consumption of unhealthy foods high in fat, sugar, and salt. We don't have a lot of nutrition statistics for South Africa because there's no regular monitoring system, but we think we know that the average level of consumption of fruits and vegetables is about 200 grams compared to the recommended 400 grams a day, so it's only half. This is a very old study that was done in 1999 and never repeated about what South African children are eating. And the most commonly consumed foods are sugar, maize, milk, white processed starch. There's a little bit of fruit down at the bottom. I pulled the ones for Gauteng and Western Cape, but it was the same for all of the provinces. Unfortunately, we don't have anything newer than 1999 for this, but it's unlikely that it has improved significantly. And it's not only what we eat, but how we eat that also matters, because if we eat on the go, on the move, outside of the home instead of cooking, if we buy prepared meals instead of cooking because we don't have time, then slowly we lose the skills. We don't even know how to prepare the foods anymore, and we're then at the mercy of what the industrial food processors and restaurants produce for us. And you go to a supermarket where the seasons no longer apply and the vast majority of the food is shelf stable for 1 year, except for one small corner where there's some fruit and vegetables. So that's the national picture. In my own research, I found the same thing. I spent a couple of years working with urban farmers in Johannesburg, and they kept food diaries. And these are urban farmers who have free access to fresh fruits and vegetables because they produced more than they could sell, so it wasn't a trade-off. And despite that, they only took home vegetables once or twice a week. And if you look at what people were eating, bread, tea with sugar, pap, chicken livers, pap, more pap, porridge, more pap, and once in a while spinach. And there were other things growing in these gardens, but the vast majority of the time, even when cost is not a factor, there are other reasons why people are choosing not to eat healthy foods. And despite this, people told me they were eating healthy. And out of 11 people, 1 person ate 1 piece of fruit because a relative came from Limpopo with a mango. No one else had any at all. So aside from just a low amount of vegetables, there's not really diversity amongst the vegetables that people are eating. It's sort of always spinach or cabbage, maybe some tomatoes and onions. And in the garden, sometimes you find that NGOs come and help people to grow other things. They bring herbs to plant. They brought, in this case, artichokes to this garden. But that was so far removed from the eating culture of the area in Alexandra where the garden was that, one of the gardeners told me, oh, a white lady from Durban told me you can eat that thing. But no one was going to try it. And occasionally one customer would say, please could you grow lettuce for us? And they would plant some, and then no other customer would come and buy lettuce. So it made it really hard to grow a more diverse range of crops when there was no interest in them. And even the gardeners themselves, they would ask me, oh, this one, we hear you can eat this, how do you cook it? And then the third factor is in Johannesburg, and it may be very different where other people are based, there was fairly low interest in indigenous plants. So very often in a garden, people will be weeding out amaranth greens, which grow just on their own, to plant spinach instead, which takes a lot of water and fertilizer. And in areas where there are more migrants from neighboring countries, people from Zimbabwe and Malawi, they would come and they would want those indigenous vegetables. But most of the South African clients were not so interested. So if there were more interest in those really easy to grow, well-adapted plants, that would also help. So as everyone has said over the last 3 days, agroecology is all about diversity. We've heard about intercropping and companion planting and crop rotation and how all of these species work together. And so that means you need people who want to eat all of those things. It also means people have to understand that there are seasons, or be able to preserve food to eat in other seasons and not come looking for a fresh tomato in a garden in May. But that was not the case. The one on your left was a garden that was growing almost exclusively spinach and kale, and the one on your right was a more agroecological garden that was planted at a school. So I have spent some time thinking about what we can do to change that without perhaps the advertising budget of the multinational food companies. And one obviously important thing is education around all of the aspects of food. So education by farmers of children of how food is grown and what agroecology means, more education on health and nutrition, and more education about the history of food in this country or wherever people are, so that people understand how it got to be the way it is now and why it's worth changing it again. These pictures are from the Edible Schoolyard in Oakland, California, where at this one school they have a teaching kitchen, a permaculture garden, and a teaching space in the garden. So they talk about the history of the foods that are growing, going back to the indigenous peoples, and then they go into the kitchen and they cook them, and they integrate it with their lessons on science and math and everything else. So it's a very comprehensive program around food. And then also, we talk about consumers, and I hate that word because it means you have as much power as you have money, but everyone eats. And certain institutions have a lot more money, like government, and they can use that money to buy better food for people to eat, like in-school lunches, or in this case in Brazil, at popular restaurants where good healthy meals are subsidized for everyone to have access. Programs like that can provide a stable income for farmers, and they can also provide people with a chance to taste new foods that they might not buy on their own the first time. But if you eat it in your school lunch or you eat it at a popular restaurant, you then might be interested in trying it at home. So those are just a couple of ideas, but Luby is actually doing this work, so she will have some more. But we'll do a little more history first. And in terms of farmers, the farmer's job is the farming, of course, and that's the main thing, but you can maybe do a few other things to help as well by knowing about the different varieties that you plant and sharing them, as most of the farmers here are already doing, and sharing the seeds and educating your customers a bit. And if people come to the garden and they want to know, well, what do I do with this plant? If you have an idea for them, that can be really helpful. And of course, if you can partner, Luby will talk more about this, if you can partner with chefs or other people, they can worry about that, and at least they can help you to know about different ways to prepare things. And then also to have partners for things like preservation and processing, and I'm not talking about adding chemicals, I'm talking about the old kinds of preservation and processing, drying things so you can use them in another season, or canning, just very simple things that have been done for ages and that allow you to, continue to sell certain foods all year. So I think, there is more we can do, and we can all play our role in shifting diets towards a more agroecological system. Thank you, and I will now hand over. We'll save all questions for the end if that's okay. I'll now hand over to Zayan.